vascular system. First, we need to know what an aneurysm is. It's basically a bulge in the arterial wall. It's most commonly caused by atherosclerosis combined with high blood pressure. And if it breaks, then you'll bleed, and that can cause big problems, especially if it's a blood vessel going to your brain or your heart. So we need to know the types of blood vessels. Basically, you have arteries, veins, and capillaries. Arteries are carrying blood away from the heart. Veins are returning blood to the heart. That's always true. Capillaries connect the smallest arteries to the smallest veins. They are where nutrient exchange happens. And blood vessels have different layers. They all have 3 layers. Well, arteries and veins have 3 layers: the tunica intima, tunica media, and tunica externa. A capillary just has the tunica intima. So we need to know the types. We need to know that arteries carry blood away from the heart and can withstand high pressures due to their elastic tissue. So arteries have a lot of elastic tissue, and that allows them to withstand the changes in blood pressure that come every time your heart beats. Alright, so we need to know some different types of arteries. Conducting arteries are the largest. They're very elastic, so they're going to be able to withstand, again, the high pressure. Distributing arteries lead to specific organs. They are very muscular, and we can change their diameter. So for example, when you're running a race, you would send lots of blood down to your leg muscles. So you would open those arteries going to your leg muscles, and then after the race is over and you're eating, you would send less blood to the legs and more blood to your stomach. Then the arterioles are the smallest. These are sometimes called resistance vessels. They lower the blood pressure before it gets to the capillaries. And in the systemic circulatory system, arteries carry oxygen-rich blood and veins carry oxygen-poor blood. That's reversed in the pulmonary circulation. Veins carry blood to the heart and have valves to ensure the blood flows one way. So here we can see a valve. Those valves make it so we don't have to work as hard to get the blood back to the heart. There's not as much pressure in veins, so we need valves to help the blood move. Capillaries are the thinnest vessels that allow for nutrient exchange. They are arranged in capillary beds so that every cell is close to a capillary, so you can see how thin the wall is. It's just a single cell plus a basement membrane. So things can diffuse in and out of there very rapidly. And this shows how capillaries work. So in the middle, there's what's called a meta-arteriole, which can directly connect the arteriole and the venule. So this is showing blood flow to a muscle. So during exercise, it's sending lots of blood out to the muscle tissue. At rest, the blood just goes through this meta-arteriole in the middle. During periods of rest, 90% of the capillaries and skeletal muscle shut down. Next thing we need to know is diffusion. So diffusion is just substances moving from areas of greater to lesser concentration. So generally, oxygen concentration is high in the blood, so it's going to diffuse from the blood to the tissues. Carbon dioxide is going to be high in the tissue, so it's going to diffuse from the tissues into the blood. Filtration occurs at the arterial end of a capillary because the higher pressure inside the capillary pushes nutrients out. So the pressure is highest at the arterial end, and well, the cells can't go through, but the plasma and the nutrients dissolved in it will leave, and that's called filtration. Then when we get to the venous end of the capillary, colloid osmotic pressure is going to pull the tissue fluid along with the cell's waste products into the capillary. So let's watch this animation.
The body uses several different mechanisms to move substances into and out of capillaries. These mechanisms are diffusion, filtration, and osmosis. The most important mechanism for capillary exchange is diffusion. In diffusion, substances move from areas of greater
mention this in this video, but there's more filtration than more stuff leaves the capillaries than is reabsorbed by them. The rest is picked up by the lymphatic system, which we'll talk about next chapter. Alright, so question: capillaries release oxygen and take up carbon dioxide from surrounding tissues through the process of, and correct answer is diffusion. Alright, we need to learn about edema. So when fluid filters out of the capillaries faster than it's reabsorbed, it accumulates in the tissues. Called edema, this accumulation of fluid appears as swelling in the ankles, fingers, abdomen, or face. It may also occur in internal organs. Edema has three main causes. One is increased capillary filtration, so if blood pressure is high, that could increase capillary filtration. Another is reduced capillary reabsorption, so if there's like the main protein in blood that's responsible for the colloid osmotic pressure is albumin, and so if that can be produced, that can reduce capillary reabsorption. Another cause is obstructed lymphatic drainage, so if there's damage to the lymphatic vessels or if they're removed from a surgery or something, that can cause edema as well. Alright, the anatomy of the blood vessels you're going to do in lab, so we're not going to worry about it here. So blood flows because of differences in pressure between two structures. This chart shows the different blood pressures, and you can see pressure is highest in the aorta, and you can see it goes up and down. Pressure is highest when the left ventricle contracts, that's known as systole, so that's the systolic pressure, that's the top number of your blood pressure. So this is known as systolic pressure, and when the ventricles relax, or diastole, the blood pressure drops, and this is known as diastolic pressure. So you can see on this figure the difference between systolic and diastolic, and the pressure drops greatly in the arterioles, and so the pressure is pretty low by the time it gets to the capillaries, and it's lowest in the vena cava. Alright, we need to know the effect of the following on blood pressure. So cardiac output, when you increase cardiac output, you're going to increase blood pressure, which makes sense. Hopefully more blood makes more blood pressure. Blood volume, kind of the same thing. If you increase blood volume, you're going to increase blood pressure just because there's more blood in the blood vessels. Or if you decrease blood volume, you would decrease blood pressure. With resistance, if you increase the resistance, you're going to decrease the flow and increase the blood pressure. So the main way we increase resistance is by changing the diameter of the blood vessels. If we constrict them, make them have a less diameter, the resistance goes up and blood pressure goes up. So we can use this to control our blood pressure. When resistance goes down, blood pressure goes down. Resistance would go down by opening up or dilating the blood vessels. Peripheral resistance is what causes blood pressure. It's from friction of blood against the walls of vessels, and it depends on the blood viscosity or thickness and the vessel diameter. We can adjust blood pressure by vasoconstriction. Again, this would increase the pressure because it increases the resistance, and vasodilation would decrease the pressure because we're decreasing the resistance. Alright, this figure shows blood velocity. You can see on the top it shows the total cross-sectional area and then the velocity. So you can see it's fastest in the aorta. That's also where the pressure is highest. And then you can see it slows down as the pressure, as the arteries branch out, as they get bigger. The total cross-sectional area increases as you're going through the arterioles, and it's the biggest in the capillaries. So that means the resistance is lowest. Even though each capillary is microscopic, there are millions of them. So the total cross-sectional area goes up, and so the resistance goes down, and that's why the blood slows down, and we need it to go slow as you go to the venules and the veins, the total cross-sectional area goes down and the blood velocity starts to increase. Alright, we need to describe what happens to an artery as the heart beats. So down in this picture you can see the elastic layers in an artery. The elastic property of healthy arteries allows them to expand with each beat of the heart to absorb some of the force of ejected blood. Then, during diastole, the arteries recoil, shrinking their diameter. This expansion and recoil propels blood steadily downstream toward the capillaries. It also helps smooth out the surges of pressure that occur with systole, protecting smaller arteries. So again, this figure shows the changes. So every time the heart beats, the pressure goes way up. Your aorta and your large arteries, they can handle these changes in pressure because they have this elastic tissue. Your capillaries would not be able to handle this change in pressure, so that's why it drops before it gets to the capillaries. Alright, next we need to describe how the body redistributes blood flow according to its needs. So changing the diameter of blood vessels allows the body to redistribute blood flow according to its needs. For example, after eating, blood vessels to the skeletal muscles and kidneys constrict, whereas those to the gastrointestinal system dilate. This directs a larger amount of blood to the gastrointestinal system, giving it the blood it needs for digestion and nutrient absorption. When the digestion process ends, the body reverses the process to redirect blood back to the kidneys and other organs. Atherosclerosis is one of the biggest health problems. So it begins when the endothelium becomes damaged, possibly by high blood pressure, by high cholesterol, by smoking, or by high blood glucose levels. There may be a role for the intestinal microbiota in this as well. So when the endothelium is damaged, this triggers an inflammatory response. Monocytes, which are white blood cells, are going to travel to this area and they absorb cholesterol particles and they create a plaque called a fatty streak. Then platelets will stick to this and the smooth muscle cells grow around this, and this results in this mass of lipid, smooth muscle, and macrophages called an atheroma or an atherosclerotic plaque. Then as the atheroma grows, the arterial lumen becomes obstructed and less blood can flow through there. Platelets adhering to the arterial wall release clotting factors, making the atheroma a potential site for blood clot formation. That would obstruct blood flow, and that's obviously bad. Alright, what condition would you expect to accompany atherosclerosis? And since it decreases the surface area for blood to flow through, it's high blood pressure. Alright, let's watch how the neural regulation of blood pressure.
The vascular system can quickly adjust blood pressure and alter blood flow to respond to the body's changing needs. One way it does this is through input from the nervous system. Specifically, an area of the medulla in the brain called the vasomotor center will, when stimulated, send impulses via the autonomic nervous system to alter blood vessel diameter and therefore blood pressure. Baroreceptors in
so that explains how the nervous system regulates blood pressure. It's in the medulla. When blood pressure increases, there are pressure receptors that detect that. They're going to cause parasympathetic impulses, which is going to cause vasodilation, which is going to lower blood pressure. When blood pressure is low, that's going to activate the sympathetic system, which causes vasoconstriction, which would increase the blood pressure. So that's how we keep our blood pressure normal. There are several hormones that can change blood pressure. Renin, angiotensin 1, angiotensin 2, we'll talk more about them later. Aldosterone, antidiuretic hormone, epinephrine, and norepinephrine, they're all going to cause blood pressure to rise. The hormone that causes blood pressure to fall is called atrial natriuretic peptide, or ANP. It's released from the heart, so if there's too much pressure in the heart, that's released and it will cause blood pressure to fall. Now, the pressure is high in arteries, so the blood is pushed through them, but the pressure is very low in veins. So we have a couple things that help blood flow through the veins. One is the valves, so the blood only has to flow a short distance, and the valves ensure that it flows one way back towards the heart. The other is what's called the skeletal muscle pump. So as you walk or do anything with your skeletal muscles, they're going to squeeze on those veins, and as it squeezes, the blood can only go one way because of the valve, so it's going to be pushed back towards the heart. And then when that muscle relaxes, the blood can't flow backwards because of the valves. We also have what's called the respiratory pump. So every time you breathe in or out, the pressure changes in your thoracic cavity, and so as the pressure increases, that squeezes on the veins, and again the valves cause the blood to flow one way back towards the heart. So those are important for